What we're going to be looking at in this video is the brush tool. Now the brush tool can do some interesting things, but it's not necessarily the same free-form drawing as maybe Photoshop or Sketchbook Pro. But let's take a look at what the brush tool can do. So at first glance, at face value, right, the brush tool kind of works like this, right? So I'm using a Wacom tablet and I'm just kind of drawing these items. Now you may say, well, does it have more options than that? It sure does. So if we click over to the brushes, this is the basic set that we have. So let's just double click on this so we can see what's going on. And you can see it says angle is random, roundness is random, size is fixed. Well, what we want to do is we want to change that. So I'm going to change that to pressure. And I'm going to change this to pressure. And I'm going to bring my variation all the way up. The idea of the variation being brought up is that just changes how much of the variation can happen. So now I'm going to apply to the strokes. So now as I press lightly versus hard, I get a different weighted line brush, which is really nice to be able to draw like that inside of Illustrator. So the reason I say that it's, not as fluid as some of the other programs, it just feels like there's a little bit of a lag. I feel like the pressure is not as great, but let's just kind of explore in here as far as what we can do. So that was a basic one. Let's create our own here. So new brush down at the bottom, and I'm going to do new calligraphy brush and do OK. And I can say, you know what, I want to keep it fairly round. I want pressure that's in here. The size, let's start it a little bit bigger, but let's do pressure and let's change it so it's going from thin to thick, and let's do OK. And you can see it added a new brush here in my brush palette. And so light to thick, and there's my brush. And you may decide, you know what? I don't want that. I want that size to go a little bit lower to start. Right, so let's go maybe 10. Or 12. Let's bring my variation up. And let's do OK. We're going to apply to my strokes. And you can see now I can kind of start off and do this. So even with the lightest pressure, I still can't come to a really definitive point like in some of the other programs, but we'll kind of, we can kind of deal with that. So that's doing making your own kind of brush in there. And I could change all sorts of things inside this brush. Let's give it a little bit of an angle, or let's start it. Oops. What did I do? Let's start this at 0. But maybe let's start it a little bit squished, right? So we are dealing with that kind of brush, which has this really nice feeling to it as well. So one thing that you'll notice about these brushes is they come in at, so what this is they're now lines, right? So they're not shapes. So if I wanted to create these into shapes, what I would have to do is go Object, Expand Appearance. And now this is a shape, and I can now stroke that if I wanted to, right? So that's a nice handy kind of trick that we can do. One other thing while looking at here is while we're in the brushes here, let's just go to our brush library and let's go to Artistic and let's do some ink brushes here. And there we go. Let's select that ink brush. Let's get my brush tool. Make sure I'm on that. I am. So this is the only downfall. If I want something a little bit more organic as a brush, you can see it's just doing these dots and then it applies the brush to it. So that's one kind of downfall with this, but you can see it applies it, which is nice. And these are all strokes, right? So I could change the stroke if I wanted to go into Object and go to Expand Appearance. And then now here are my outline strokes, right? So there's some really nice features that you can kind of do within Illustrator. There's a lot you can explore inside of these brushes palettes. So let's do this one. Let's change this from gray. Let's do a dark so we can see what's going on. There we go. Right, and the same thing, I could take all these, Object, Expand Appearance. And now you can see you have a different effect with that, which is kind of neat, right? It's a nice effect there. So that's kind of drawing using the brush tools inside of Illustrator.